Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I'm Vib.
And I'm Sean, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Before we get to the episode, let's award the much vaunted Expertise is Overrated Tinfoil Award.
Now, as a reminder, this is an award that we give out at the start of each episode to the person who had the most ridiculous point in last week's episode.
And this week, I think for the second week, no, not the second week in a row, but the second time in 3 episodes, you're getting it, which is really exciting for me.
Yeah, it was a pity tinfoil, you know. We started to feel bad for you.
I'm not having this. Every time I get it, it's because I've been an absolute moron. But every time you get it, it's some sort of pity tinfoil for me. And frankly, I'm done with this crap.
Well,
you said something stupid. Own it.
No, I mean, because every time I get it, it's for objectively correct things.
No, this is the point. Every time you get it, it's for provably wrong. Anyway. So last week, when we were discussing the Marvel Cinematic Universe, what did you say?
I said that Loki is definitely not dead.
Definitely. You said 100%.
100%
definitely not dead. And given that we heard his neck break and saw him turn purple, and then he was left on a ship that was exploded with a Infinity Stone.
All right,
he's
yeah,
dead, mate.
Yeah. You know what? I will inscribe this shiny hat with the statement "Loki is alive," and then I will hand it back to you when it turns out he is, and it'll be a glorious day for all.
I have just remembered that the Disney Plus Loki show starts in 2 days' time, so I can be proven wrong really quickly.
I think we should do a little Expertise is Overrated reviews on that series, especially if Loki is alive at the moment.
If we don't do one, you know what happens, dear listener.
Absolutely. Well, I'm determined to give you the tinfoil this week somehow. We'll see.
Oh, it'll happen. Don't worry. We had a couple of... Yeah, no, Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. First, we've got some feedback from our dear listeners once again. The first one, a very close personal friend of mine, Justine. She told me she wanted to have a proper catch-up soon, so she can not talk to me in person for saying all Star Wars films are bad. Yeah, I feel
amazing.
Yeah, she's got a point. She's got a point. But just to reiterate, we are both massive fans of the Star Wars films. They're all excellent, but they're also all terrible.
Yes, and I think, Justine, we've never met, and you'd like me less than you like Vib, and that's probably saying something. But yeah, if you're unhappy about that, you're not going to be happy when we come out swinging in a few episodes' time about proving that they're all terrible. But I know I also have a little bit of feedback. So my wife listened to her first ever episode of Expertise is Overrated. She also listened to the Star Wars episode. She listened to the whole thing, and then she said, I didn't hate it. Which, you know, that's about as good as any of us were expecting. So I just nodded and said, thank you. And then the conversation moved on.
I mean, I'll take it. To be honest, I'll take it. That's. I'm going to just go out and say I felt that's high praise.
It is. Our tastes in fiction don't really overlap very much. So actually, I didn't hate it. It's pretty high praise.
Excellent. I mean, as ever, please do give us any and all feedback that you want.
Definitely. And actually, just before we get to the main part of this episode, and it's a really good one, we're very excited. We'd both just like to say thank you to everyone who's been tuning in to listen to our absolutely insane ramblings. We never really expected to make it to 10 episodes. We were fairly sure that we'd have just fallen out by now.
Yeah, more so than usual, that is.
Yeah, and the fact we're still going really is, I think, down to the fact that people like you are tuning in to listen to all of this nonsense. So for that, again, thank you very much. And we hope to keep recording for as long as people are willing to listen to our nonsense.
Well said. I, for once, fully agree with you. How about that? How about that? 10 episodes. Yeah, that is actually kind of crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't really bear thinking about.
It's been fun, though. It's been fun. And to, give a slight teaser, there's a hot take coming in the not too distant future. We'll see if we survive that one, because it'll be me doing it this time.
I'm really, really looking forward to that.
That might be the end of it.
That is also some good sizzle. Well done.
I know, right? I know. Got to get the sizzle going. Got to get the sizzle going.
Right. So, shall we get to the meat of it?
Well, I think before we move on, happy birthday to Carl Urban.
Oh yeah, of course. Happy birthday, Carl.
Yeah, let's move.
Right. Today, as we mentioned last time, we want to talk about early access, the practice of selling. This may come out slightly loaded, unfinished video games to the general public, and then continuing to develop them while they're in circulation. I think probably to give a bit of context, we should both explain how we come to this, right? Because I guess we're about the same age. We both grew up in an era where you got computer game demos in magazines. I remember that. I remember just as Steam was becoming a thing, before it was sort of the behemoth that it is now, being able to download demos of games for free off Steam, back when download rates were measured in kilobits per minute. And something changed.
Something to change.
I,
God, you remember the days of like those the Windows games that came on discs? Do you remember discs?
I do.
Also mentioned cartridges back in the day, and when you bought a game, it was actually finished.
We're definitely coming on to that. I think we need to frame the conversation. This has the potential to, one, be quite controversial, shock horror, but also I think early access means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So, I mean,
to be honest with you, up until quite recently, for me, it wasn't ever really a thing that I paid an awful lot of attention to.
Okay.
And sort of having thought about it the past few days, I don't actually know why I didn't give it much thought, because
it's a huge shift in how video games are marketed, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if part of that is because I think I do predominantly game on console still, more so than PC. I mean, I play on both, right. And I think the sort of PlayStation, Xbox, there's a bit less of an early access market, perhaps. I don't know, but we can come on to that. But
I think that's a really good question. No, I think I'm more of a PC gamer, so I may have seen it more.
But what was it? What was the moment for you that made you think, "Wow, this is a really interesting discussion"?
It was Bannerlord, I think, or Baldur's Gate 3, which are on our list of things to talk about, I think, towards the end of the episode. But there was something about those two launches in particular, and they were quite close together in time, that really hammered home to me that there was something fundamental seemed to have changed, and I'd missed it. And I don't know whether it was because I spent some time not doing that much gaming, just because I was far too busy with work, or what it was. But I found myself really yearning for the days when you went down to Game or Electronic Boutique or whatever it might have been,
CAX,
CEX, and you bought a jewel case or a DVD case in later years, and it had a disc on it, or multiple discs, or even a cartridge, as you said, and you put that into your PC or your console, and you had a finished game, and it just worked. And that was it. There was no DLC. There were expansions, but I feel like they're different. And you went out and you bought those as well, and everything got installed. I don't know. I decided something had changed, and I wanted to try and work out with you whether or not we think that change has been net good or net bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good discussion. From the way that you phrased it early on, I'm going to say that you're probably tending towards not being a massive fan.
So I think I was, but then I started looking, and we need to come on to this, looking at the list of games that had been through early access. And
Mm.
God, there are some good games on there. But before we get to that, shall we? We went and looked at, so early access, for those who don't know, and trying to be slightly less prejudicial, is the practice of putting a game at before version 1, right? So if you think version 1 is your release version, version 0.5, etc., will be made available for sale on Steam, which is a massive video game distribution platform, with the caveat warning: this game is in early access. Essentially, buy at your peril.
Yeah, and I think that the sort of industry professionals would probably refer to this as some sort of alpha access to your game, or maybe even like a paid alpha type thing, which is interesting, right? Because I think quite a while now we've had beta access to games, and I know that mainly from games that have a big multiplayer component, right? So your Call of Duties, your Battlefields, etc., where they just get the community to onto a test server to make sure that everything works and to see what needs tweaking, etc. Get a good balance. But that's sort of in the framework of a fully functioning release level game almost, and that's why they call it beta access, right? Because they don't need to do much other than tweak a few stats here and there, ideally.
Polish at that stage.
Exactly, and then they release it. So the fact that early access games can be said to be an alpha, that could possibly raise some flags, no?
I think so. So we've got here the Steam definition of early access, which I thought might be quite illuminating. So, quoting the definition: get immediate access to games that are being developed with the community's involvement. These are games that evolve as you play them, as you give feedback, and as the developers update and add content. We like to think of games and game development as services that grow and evolve with the involvement of customers and the community. There have been a number of prominent titles that have embraced this model of development recently and found a lot of value in the process. We like to support and encourage developers who want to ship early, involve customers, and build lasting relationships that help everyone make better games. This is the way games should be made.
Yeah, it's quite a statement to end on, isn't it?
It's a really punchy statement, isn't it?
Yeah, because especially on the Steam side, that's like highlighted blue, right? So they really want to get that point across that they like this as a model.
Yeah.
But interestingly, they also have another section which I think is important for the consumer, which they sort of hide a bit further down the page. At least that's that's what I thought. And it says, when will games release, right? And they say it's up to the developer to determine when they are ready to release. Some developers have a concrete deadline in mind, while others will get a better sense as the development of the game progresses. You should be aware that some teams will be unable to finish their game, finish in like quotation marks. So you should only buy an early access game if you are excited about playing it in its current state.
Now, fundamentally, that I agree with.
Well, absolutely, but it's, on the one hand, they're saying this is the way games should be made, and then further down, they are conceding that the games may actually not technically be fully made.
So, yeah, and that's
problematic.
That should raise an eyebrow. Yes. I think we are encouraging consumers to pay real money for a product that may never be what is promised.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't quite sit well with me, Although I do appreciate the fact that they say, you are essentially paying money to play the game as is now, and it may never change.
Yeah.
Which then I suppose it's kind of fair.
Yeah. We need to get into specifics, because I think there are loads of different games that have used or are still in the early access model that are all doing it differently, and probably are the best way to discuss this. But one thing that I have a slight hang up with is cost. Right, so at the moment of recording, I checked this 10 minutes ago, there are 5,746 games with the early access tag on Steam. So 5,746.
Wow.
So of those, nearly 4,000 are marketed at less than £20, or in other words, more than 1,700 unfinished games on Steam are on sale for more than £20. And Steam is saying these might never be finished. Now, you want me to be your beta tester or even your alpha tester, but still pay full value for the game? That's where I really start to struggle with it, because
Yeah,
it's outsourced QA, isn't it? Is it? Am I missing something?
I don't think you are. And just to put that number into a bit more context, I think as of February 12th this year, Steam reached 50,000 total games listed. So you're
So
saying that over
more than
10%
yeah.
of games are early access, according to Steam. Yeah, and so paying what effectively amounts to full price. But I guess they kind of have to do that, right? Because the whole idea behind it is that you buy the game early, flaws if there are any, and all. But you're still playing the game that you want to play.
But the developer is transferring all of the economic risk of the game to me.
How do you mean?
So if I'm a developer and I'm making a video game that I need to sell at £30 per copy to break even, but I haven't finished the game and still need to pay QA testers, for example, I can release it into early access at £30 per copy, have people buy the game unfinished, in the expectation that the game will follow its roadmap that I publish when I put it into early access, because that is what people think. And I've like shifted a load of my failure risk onto the consumer.
Yes, but the consumer is not protected in some way.
Well, I think we need to start talking about specifics
Yeah, I
now,
think so.
because sometimes if you can show that the developer was just lying, and I think the best example of this is a game called Goddess or Godus, I don't know how you pronounce it.
Yeah, Goddess was my first thought
Goddess.
on that one.
That was released into early access, I think, in 2013. So not long after the early access program on Steam started. And it just sat there for years, and very few improvements were made. And then at some point, the combat engine was released as another game that you could also pay early access to get into. And the promise was always that it would be wrapped into the game. But it never happened and never happened. And eventually it emerged that the lead developer had left the company, and they got him into an interview in which he basically admitted that it was all just essentially a Ponzi scheme. At that point, yeah, Steam refunded purchases, and I assume went after him for the balance. But that's a really extreme case.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's another game that I found called Earth Year 2066, which I'd never heard of before. But it sounds quite similar because it was put on Steam's early access, and in the classic way as well. That I think they put up a roadmap and said this is what the game is going to be like, etc., etc. But then people who bought into it said it's just bug central, completely unplayable. A bunch of journalists got involved and said, this is ridiculous. So they had to go at the developer, etc. Essentially claiming that they were abusing the early access system, presumably along the lines of what you're saying. They're trying to get money to either keep developing or just to get money and run for it. I don't know. But Valve, so that the company that own Steam, removed the title, and again they refunded the people who bought it. It's quite funny. They then said Steam does require honesty from developers in the marketing of their games.
We're not okay with people lying,
which is good of them. But what I think is interesting there is that those are obviously two examples of abject failures of any games distribution system. And it very much sounds like Steam here picked up the the cost, right? They had to
Sure.
reimburse the people who bought it. So I guess there's a question in there of, does early access make sense as long as there is a middleman distributor that can cover any potential
Maybe,
fuck ups and
maybe,
cover your
but then
costs as
you
we
look
consume
at. Sorry, I interrupted you. Maybe, but then you look at a game like Interstellar Marines, for example, and that entered early access in July 2013. So again, 7 months after the early access program launched, and it's just still in early access. I spent nearly 8 years in early access.
it. What are its reviews like? Do you know?
Actually, no, that's a really good question. I should have checked that. Quick ad lib.
We bring you these commercials.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled broadcast.
Actually, first thing that popped up on Steam for me there was Ark Survival, which I think is also still early access.
So, all reviews mixed, recent reviews mostly negative.
Oh dear.
And it's on at, depending on which edition you buy, between £6.95 and £29.95.
Okay, massive range. And it's still in early access.
It's still in early access.
And is there an obvious roadmap? Is there a release date of this game? Is it ever going to leave early access?
Well, this is the complicating factor. So, according to Steam, its release date is the 2nd of July 2013, because that's when it went into early access.
Yes, and I noticed it with some other games, and it really winds me up that
So
it's not a release date if it's early access.
Well, there's something to come on to about. There's no really big question around when do games release, but so in 2016 we started looking for a publisher investor to fund the completion of Interstellar Marines and help us release out of early access and port onto PS4 and Xbox One. Once we've finalized an investment or publishing agreement, we estimate 17 months from that date until Interstellar Marines is completed. Now, obviously, it's now 5 years after they started looking for a publisher investor. So this game's never getting released.
No.
That's what I'm reading.
Yeah, but I think then this is clearly what Steam is saying, right? This is a case where a game may never be quote unquote finished, right? But there is still a product that you can buy and play, and you just have to be aware that that gameplay, much like a full release game, might just be no good, right? We've talked about back in the day where you buy a cartridge, you'd buy a disc, you'd buy something. That is the final release of that game. It does not guarantee that that game is good.
No, but you can at least, I think, where does it get complicated? It gets complicated when the roadmap is really promising, right?
Sure.
And I don't want to go there yet because it's completely out of any vague idea of structure, but the really obvious difficult example here is Star Citizen, right? Because the roadmap for that game is
bonkers,
phenomenal. That if it ever actually gets released, it'll just be probably the best video game ever made.
Yeah, but it's bonkers.
It's completely insane, but it's also like just a completely unfinished game at this stage and costs insane money to buy into. And I'm still not 100% convinced it's not a Ponzi scheme as well.
Yeah, do you have any idea what state that game is in currently? Because all I really know about it is some crazy numbers.
I was chatting about it before we came on. Let me just find the conversation. It essentially, I think, is you can screw around in it, but it's very clearly an unfinished game. I asked someone to give it a 1 to 10 rating at the moment, and it got 4.5. And this person had spent the wrong side of $1,000 on it.
Yeah, and I think when you're starting to throw amounts of money around like that, you're doing it in, well, maybe not so much the knowledge, but at least in the hope that eventually this will be a worthwhile investment, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely what. But that's right. I think at that point you have to look at it as an investment, and then it should come with all of the financial promotions language that people seeking investment are required to put. Capital at risk, value of investment can go up or down. Obviously, they don't quite work for early access, but it really worries me that Star Citizen, I was on its website earlier today, doesn't have a massive, stamp across the whole screen going, this game is unfinished. It may never be finished. It's been in development, I think, for the last 30 years. And it's showing
Yeah,
no sign of being
yeah.
completed.
No, and I think that is problematic.
Hmm. Do
It
you know the
really is
most money you can
problematic.
spend in Star Citizen?
Oh, do I want to know?
$27,000.
Sorry,
So apparently, if you
US
want
dollars.
US dollars, if you want access, yes, sorry, we are jumping around. We are jumping around currencies here, but no, 27,000 US dollars to get full access to everything in the game now and forever.
$27,000.
Yes, the single most expensive asset in the game was a ship, a single ship that cost $3,000.
Absolute lunacy.
$27,000 is a house deposit.
$3,000 on a single ship in a game. I mean,
Single
do they
ship.
send you the full working version of the ship for that money?
No, that's the most ridiculous thing. That ship's not actually in the game yet. It's a promise that when they make that ship, you can use it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's.
I
Well, I mean, that's bad. But I don't think that's bad because it's early access.
No,
That's just a ludicrous
that's
business
just
model in the
fact.
first place. I mean, this is loot crates taken to the max.
Yeah.
Instead of leaving it up to chance, where you spend say $5 on a crate and you might get a ship worth $3,000. They just say no, just give us $3,000 and we will give you the ship. Which, I mean, fair enough. They're taking out the gambling element, but still, $3,000 on a single item in a game.
But
That's
you
madness.
are gambling because the game might never be finished.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true. Yeah, is that pay to win then as well? Do you think?
I mean, if I've spent $3,000 on an asset for a multiplayer video game and I'm not winning, I'm going to be grumpy.
Yeah, I can imagine so.
It has to be
And you
pay
think
to win,
if a
right?
few people chuck in $27,000, surely they can finish the game with that money.
I don't know.
No?
I don't know how far away from finished it is. I mean, if it's only getting 4.5 out of 10 from someone who's sunk, I genuinely don't know the amount of money, but four figures into it, like it, I don't know. They could be millions away.
Yeah. No, that
But
that
you're
that
right.
that to me seems like a really extreme
No,
case
I
because I
think
mean that's a ludicrous setup for any game. I mean,
no.
come on,
I think you're right.
$3,000. I've not spent that much on games in my life.
I think you might be surprised. No, I think those three, so Interstellar Marines, Goddess, and Star Citizens, are for different reasons. And Earth 2066 are for different reasons. The real extremes. The issue that I think I still have is all of the little ones, all of the little $10 games, 15 quid games that are made with basic assets in Unity, very little time, very little effort, get put into early access with a bare bones roadmap and then abandoned. And then 2 years after they've generated revenue, the
Yeah.
developers say, "Oh, sorry, actually, turns out the appetite isn't here," and then they pop up in another game in another few years doing exactly the same thing. And that's
Yeah.
where I think there's a real problem.
And I'm tempted to agree. And I think the question for me there is, do they get more revenue by saying, here is an unfinished early access game, here's our roadmap, buy into it in the hopes that this will actually turn out to be the game that you're interested in. And they sort of do that because they know that people will buy that more than if you say, here's just a really kind of shit game that we've made, as you say, just with some basic Unity assets, $10 and you can play around for an hour.
I think they must do.
So do you think that they're using the early access brand almost as a means to make more money?
So I think that what the early access brand lets you do is release an obviously unfinished game with a roadmap, which in and of itself I don't know is necessarily a problem, although I'd quite like someone to just sell me a finished game at some point in the not too distant
Sure,
future.
but is it necessarily too different from saying, here's our final release game, here are the DLCs we have planned?
No, so what I was going to say, though, is the problem is that I feel like a lot of those unfinished games, everyone knows that everyone on the developer end knows the roadmap is a lie, or if not a lie, so wildly aspirational as to never happen. I think that's where it's a problem. Because I think that people buy into aspiration. Star Citizen's the obvious example of that. And yes, it's at the far, far end of the bell curve. But that I think is proving Cyberpunk 2077 is another example. People buy hype. Obviously, Cyberpunk didn't go into early access, but it's still part of this. You release bits of a game. Here's a little bit of the combat engine. Here's vaguely how we want base building to work. Here's some of the assets that we got someone on Fiverr to make. And
you see, but
that's enough to get it into early access. And that,
no, I agree with you, but I think there's just not enough legal technicality around all this, right? Because what you're essentially describing to me sounds like it's just game developers operating in bad faith. This is they've released something they know is not finished. They probably know is never going to be finished in order to just make money that they might reinvest in another project.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a load of games. Honestly, I can't remember the titles, and it's really bugging me. But there's this, I think, 3 games that are called like, this isn't right, but like City Builder Vikings, City Builder Egyptians, City Builder Greeks. I think it's something like that.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I also don't know what they're called.
All in early access. They all went into early access on the same day, and they're all in for about like 15 quid. And they're the same game with slightly different asset packs, and none of them look finished. None of them have a particularly compelling roadmap, and I would stake good money none of them will ever be finished. Right? And that's the problem. And yes, I think that is game developers just acting in bad faith.
Yeah.
Or not even bad faith, it's just fraud.
Yeah. That's dangerously close to where we're at with that sort of thing, isn't it?
I think
I think it's the purpose with which they do it. Because when you mentioned Cyberpunk 2077, I mean, obviously, as you say, it wasn't early access, but it wasn't what you might call a polished game. I think it was technically finished when they launched it, but
it launched as version 1. Put it that way.
It launched as version 1, but this is unfortunately much more commonplace now, where games developers launch a game and instantly have to patch it.
Very true.
But that's a whole different discussion. And it's I think it's the bad faith element, and it as a consumer, I think it's really difficult, right? Because when you're looking at games like, say, City Planner, but let's just call it that. I'm not sure it is called that. City Planner Greeks. Sounds phenomenal. I love a good city building game. Exactly. I love Greeks. Put the two together, that sounds like a game that I might want to play. I'm not a very smart consumer. I look at that and go, perfect. That's exactly what I need. It turns out to be shit. I've wasted my money. Is that my fault? hard to know.
Steam would say yes.
Steam would say yes, but then equally, I go on Steam, I look at Bannerlord, Mountain Blade, Bannerlord
Exactly.
2, or I look at Baldur's Gate 3. Both obviously not the first games in their series, both made by semi-reputable developers.
I know.
Both early access. And Baldur's Gate 3, I think, costs some phenomenal amount of money. Isn't it like £50?
I think it's 50 quid. Yeah.
And it's not finished. At least last I checked.
Bannerlord isn't far off that either, I don't think.
But does Bannerlord have a story? Because BG3, you're going to play because it's a story, like it's an RPG, right?
if Bannerlord is anything like Warband, it has the bare bones of a story that you can do something with if you want. But no, Bannerlord's 40 quid.
Yeah, so there's two games which are in early access, cost a lot of money for a lot of people. And they're just not finished.
No. And there's an argument to be said, taking Baldur's Gate, that the reason Baldur's Gate was put into early access was so that people could play it. Because it's Larian who are doing it, isn't it? The same people who did Divinity.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
So it will be finished. And I think they put both Divinities through, both Original Sins through early access as well.
Yeah,
and that is something that we need to come on to, all of the success stories. But Baldur's Gate 3 is going to be finished, and when it's finished, it'll probably be a pretty decent game, because Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were very good, and Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2 are both very good, very popular, very well received games. So putting Baldur's Gate 3 into early access is just, look, guys, here's an unfinished game. Go have fun while we finish it. We know it's buggy. We know it's missing entire classes from 5th edition. It's missing entire character customization options, what have you. That's coming, and because we're who we say we are, you can be comfortable that that's going to be the case.
See, but what I think is a little backwards about that, right? Because the way I think early access would work really well for a game like Baldur's Gate 3 is if they had developed the entire engine, worked out bugs insofar as possible, put in all the classes, all the customization options, and then just not have finished the story, right? Because if it's anything like Divinity Original Sin 2, which I'm currently playing, it is going to be difficult. It's going to take a long time. It will take you ages and ages and ages before you get far into the game, at which point the developers could spend the time, while the game is already sort of out in early access, to finish the story, but have a fully functioning game in the background. If that makes sense.
I agree with that. Sort of like when you're downloading, especially on consoles, some games you can play Act 1 while it downloads Acts 2 and 3 in the background.
Exactly. It's like a...
It's that just one step removed. Play Act 1 while we finish Acts 2 and 3 in the background.
But I think the problem there probably is if they market it like that, right? Play Act 1, then you get an episodic game, like those Walking Dead ones and the Game of Thrones ones. I forget the developer. They're really good. Yeah, Telltale, exactly. Which is fine. You can make an episodic game.
Would that be a bad thing?
Not necessarily.
I'd pay 3 lots of 20 quid for Baldur's Gate 3 Part 1, 3 Part 2, and 3 Part 3.
Yeah, I agree.
And they've just sold me 10 quid more than I'm going to pay for Baldur's Gate 3 whenever it comes out.
I agree. But I guess the risk they run in that scenario is that a bunch of people spend 20 quid on the first one and then that's it.
Yes, that's absolutely right.
But then at that point, they can just can Part 3 and cut their losses.
Can you imagine the fallout?
Yeah, well, maybe that's exactly the reason why they don't do that, and they go for early access instead.
No, that's potentially true.
I mean, okay, let's approach it from the other side of the fence, because we've talked very negatively about all of this.
We have done.
Whereas we should both be upfront and say that we've actually recently enjoyed, a particular early access game rather a lot, to the extent where I hadn't even realized it was an early access.
No, but isn't that sort of the point? Like, well, maybe not.
I suppose, but then you wonder, why is it still in early access? I mean, it's buggy. That's probably why.
One, it's buggy. Two, there are definitely unfinished systems in there. I think.
The game we're referring to is
Sorry,
Valheim,
yeah,
by
no,
the
we're
way,
talking about Valheim,
which is
we're riding
an
that wave
excellent
of
game.
populism.
Absolutely. I mean, you get to play as a dead Viking making their way in Valheim. Kind of Minecrafty with building things, fighting things. It's really good fun up until a wolf comes back. Comes from behind you and just kills you instantly.
Yeah.
5 times in a row. Great game, still in early access, and I personally, if they had never told me that it was an early access game, I'm not sure I would have minded.
No, I think that's probably fair. If I was playing Valheim thinking this is as good as it's ever going to get, for what it is, I'd probably be happy with my purchase. But
Yeah,
why is it in early access? I guess the answer is because the developers think there's more they can do with the game. I don't
sure.
know. I don't know. Do you know whether they've got content expansions planned, or is this just a really long beta test?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. I don't know why. What I do know is it updates a lot.
It does
Um,
update an awful lot.
but that's nothing special. I mean, I'm looking at my
No,
Steam now, and Warhammer Vermintide 2 is updating. That game came out 2017. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege is updating. That game came out 2015 or something stupid.
sure.
Games update constantly, and this is not just new content, but they're still fixing bugs.
Or
If you're
not
Creative
fixing bugs.
Assembly, you're fixing bugs that you introduced in the last DLC with the new DLC. It's this it's this ever ongoing cycle of things.
By the way, Creative Assembly, send us our press copies of Warhammer 3. We'll give you whatever kind of review you want.
Absolutely, I can already tell you Warhammer 3 is amazing. Send game, please. When it comes to something like Valheim, I honestly don't know. And I played Subnautica, I think, when it was still in early access, and I really enjoyed that game. I mean, I could have just timed that perfectly, where they may have finished it and pushed the final updates as I was sort of playing that.
But no, it's I wanted to do this. There's a list, and I'm going to miss some off this list, but some really phenomenally popular uh, games that have come through the early access program, and a really small selection of those are Hades, which is a
Fantastic game.
genuinely exceptional roguelite or roguelike. Kerbal Space Program, which is just some of the most fun you can have with physics ever.
Absolutely. And that's another one where they're still updating it constantly,
Mm, they are. They're also making KSP2, which I am unbelievably excited about because I haven't fired Little Green Men into the sun for a while.
New developer, though, so we'll have to keep
Is
an eye.
it? That's a bit concerning. Prison Architect went through early access. That's a really good game that you can just waste a bit of time in. RimWorld went through early access, which I can't get into, but I am assured by everyone who likes it that it's amazing. Subnautica, as you've mentioned, and then this, which I didn't know. This you said this. Player Unknown Battlegrounds was,
Yeah, how crazy is that, right?
was
PUBG.
nominated. Sorry,
Yeah.
you say it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, you're quite right. It was nominated for a Game of the Year award while still in early access. This was the Game Awards 2017, and I think it caused a bit of a ruckus because that really is quite problematic, isn't it? When people are now starting to say this game is really, really, really good, but it's not finished.
Yeah.
And I confess, I've never played PUBG because all I knew from it when it first came out was that it was a bug fest and hilarious because of that. But clearly, it's a very, very good game. So,
Yeah.
yeah, as you say, examples of when early access seemingly works rather well.
So I guess my question then becomes: are there any of those games that don't happen without early access?
Exactly, and that's absolutely the right question to ask. And I don't know the answer to that.
I'm going to say definitely Kerbal Space Program doesn't happen if you don't get early access. because the amount of you don't get KSP in the way in the form that it is. No, you might get the sandbox to play in, but you wouldn't get the fleshed out career mode, all the mod support that it has, all of that. I don't think you get that, and I think that's because the game itself was such a financial risk. I imagine that it needed to go into early access so that you could spread out your development costs and sort of manage your cash flow. And that is what early access gives you from a business perspective. It gives you that control, not control, but that smoothing of cash flow that small developers do need.
No, absolutely. And looking at it now, KSP sold millions of copies in early access on Steam. But I think it's a game that probably quite uniquely lends itself to something like early access, right? Because all you really need to convince people that it's a fun game is Kerbin, as in Earth, some fundamental rocket components, all the physics, which I'm sure they had, and then say the moon and what's the other one called? Minmus, yeah, the ice cream, the orbiting ice cream. Because then you have enough of a challenge for players. You know, build some rockets, go into orbit, whatnot, go to the moon. And then because people enjoyed that, they've paid money to play that game, they can develop it, and they built a whole solar system.
And more rocket parts, the ability to build bigger spaceships, all of this can be features that are coming.
Yeah. But in that scenario, and obviously I don't know how this happened at the time, but you are essentially paying full price for a demo.
Oh, yes.
So why don't they just say, give us 10 quid for this game now, and then on full release, pay the extra however much? Bit like you and your Baldur's Gate. You know, 3 installments of 20 quid.
But didn't you answer that?
I did, yeah. It puts the risk back on the developer, potentially.
Exactly.
But
you do get that smoother cash flow, which I was talking about, which I can't stress enough is so important for small companies, because managing cash flow is phenomenally difficult.
But then we're essentially just playing the stock markets, aren't we? With games, this is cryptocurrency at its finest.
I'm not sure that's. I see what you're saying. I'm not sure that's entirely fair. It's much more. I guess it is to an extent. I'm focusing on it not so much from the risk perspective, but from the difficulty of, if you're a small developer not used to managing cash flow, how you actually pay for a launch. Because what you essentially need to do is either find an investor willing to lend you, willing to invest in your company for all of the development costs, which you, because you're a small developer, you probably don't know. You have a vague idea, but that's all. Or you find a bank willing to lend you the money at an exorbitant interest rate because you're a small developer with no track record.
But why don't you crowdfund? Go on Kickstarter, go on any of those
things. People do. Some people do crowdfund, but I mean, Kickstarter takes a cut.
True.
But so does Steam.
So then is the soundbite argument for this perhaps that early access is the only way for small developers to survive in the face of what is now a world full of, you know, your EAs, which is confusingly named when you're talking about early access, your Activisions, your Ubisofts, your whatnot.
I think you've got a good point there.
So this is an almost institutionalized way of crowdfunding independently developed games or games developed by smaller developers. Because I could get on board with that, you know? As long as you realize that you, as the consumer, are taking a bit of a risk with your money.
So I'm about to go off on one here, but I completely agree with you. No. I completely agree with you. Not off on one in an anger sense, just on a wild tangent. The real problem here is that we don't properly, at least in the UK, we don't properly teach in school the legal concept caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? We think that when we buy a product, the onus is on the seller of that product to be open and honest with us, which it sort of is, but more fundamentally than that, the onus is on the buyer to ask the questions that the buyer needs to ask in order to satisfy the buyer that they are buying what they think they are buying and that it is a good thing.
Yes.
Right. So this is why in house, if you're buying a house, for example, you as the buyer get a survey done, and then you ask the seller questions based on the results of the survey, because the seller is under no obligation to volunteer information to you.
Well, and if you think about it, that makes total sense.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it also makes total sense to the buyers at that point, because you're forking out a lot of money. You want to make sure that your buying is being valued accordingly. But the interesting thing is that when you're talking about much less money, say £10, all that logic seems to go completely out the window.
Absolutely.
And you start getting this mentality of, the customer is always right, even though the customer has done absolutely no due diligence and just says this is what I expected. Well, tough shit. You could have looked into this and found out that that's not what we were offering.
And Kickstarter, I think, is a really good counterpoint to this, because Kickstarter vets Kickstarter vets people who are doing Kickstarters really carefully, and is really, really, really strict about what you can do with the money that you get from a Kickstarter, and the updates that you have to give, and what you have to do if your Kickstarter falls over. Right? And if you have Kickstarters that fall over, it becomes harder and harder to do other Kickstarters in the future. And I don't get the sense that Steam has that. Yeah, we've got that comment from Earth 2066 about, was it, Steam does require honesty from developers in the marketing of their games. I mean, that's almost so obvious as it shouldn't need to be said. Yes, Steam, I'm really happy to hear that you require the people who use your platform to market their games to me, and from which you take a 30% cut of all revenue, you require them to not lie to me. Thank you. But I'd sort of like you to do a little bit more than that. And does this give us another problem, which is Steam is too big?
Well, that's a separate issue altogether, I think.
It is, but let's say...
And it's not just Steam doing it, right? Because isn't Hades an Epic Games game?
I think Hades is available on Steam as well.
Oh, is it?
I have it on Epic because I think I got it for free on Epic.
Well, they did some great giveaways last Christmas. Epic,
giveaway.
if you want to hit us up, put your letter in with that of Creative Assembly.
But no, you can buy Hades on Steam.
But I mean, ultimately, putting a pin in the whole Steam is too big thing.
Well,
because that also has its positives. Yeah,
just
okay.
Before we put a pin in that, the reason that I say is the problem that Steam is too big, because if Steam were slightly smaller, and Epic, as an example, were saying, we also have an early access program, and we're way more diligent in the people that we let into our early access program than Steam is, then you've got a competitive marketplace for early access, and that, I think, would work, because that would force Steam to be more...
Absolutely. I mean, something tells me that Epic Games is not the answer to diligence.
No, I don't know that Epic is the answer. Maybe Good Old Games is the... Do we still call it? Is it just GOG now?
I don't know. But a counter argument in terms of why Steam being so big is potentially good. I mean, I'm looking at Baldur's Gate 3 now, right? It's got 36,450 all-time reviews. And it's very positive. Right, so I can look at this now and say, okay, I'm interested to buy it. It quite clearly says to me it's an early access game, and it explains it all about that. But it still has the reviews and still has that thing that I'm familiar with Steam that says, okay, users seem to like it. It's got all the info, etc., etc. I can make what I believe to be a relatively informed decision on that.
That does make sense to me. That does make sense to me. And the other side of that, going back to our early access is good for small developers. Valheim sold 2 million copies in 2 weeks, and it was made by 5 people in a shed. Basically.
Exactly. Which I think is also what KSP was, right? A squad, I think, consisted of maybe like 3 guys.
So
Um,
yeah, that's roughly
so
$100 million of revenue in 2 weeks.
okay, so then if I came to you tomorrow and said Ubisoft have just launched an early access Assassin's Creed, would you
Yeah,
be okay with that?
no.
I mean, it can't be any
The-
buggier than their normal
I
releases.
was going to say, aren't all Ubisoft releases just early
They never
access
get
without a
fully
label?
released.
No, I think if you're not a, but then everyone seems, and I think I'm not super happy with it, but most people seem okay with the idea of Baldur's Gate being in early access. So
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know.
I think there's an element of you can maybe get better marketing windows. You know, you release an early access game at a time where you think it's going to be more beneficial for you than waiting and not fully releasing.
Yeah,
But I think the capital that a developer has is clearly some sort of factor in this.
I think it has to be. I don't think that's.
Yeah, I don't think Electronic Arts would ever go into something and think we're going to make this an early access build, right? Because they can
No,
smash out a fully quote unquote functioning game in 8 months because I don't know, they're sitting on an army of developers and whatnot. I guess is my feeling on this, and some studios clearly just don't like the model. I mean, you look at Santa Monica Studios, look at Naughty Dog Studios. They're making story based games that they just want to release finished, and they're award winning because they're that good when they get released.
but isn't there? I'm going to go all philosophical and romantic here again. I apologize in advance, but shouldn't that be the base? Just make a product that you can be proud of and release it to the market and hope that the market loves it as much as you do. Don't.
Sure, but you have to have the means to do that, right? And I think those studios probably subsidized by Sony in the first place, and because they make such incredible games, super lucrative. Like Rockstar, I think you could argue is still a relatively small developing studio because
Second
they make.
largest developer in the UK.
Okay, fair
But no,
enough.
you're right. You're
But they
right.
make two franchises, right? But
You're
both
right.
franchises are so unbelievably well made that they make billions and billions of pounds. Maybe just £1 billion. I can't remember how much they made. But like GTA 5 made an obscene amount of money.
You're right. You are right.
So we've kind of gone round in circles now because I sort of started thinking I'm not sure I like early access, but I think it does have its merits.
I think I still don't like it, but I think that my problem is with its implement. The more I think about it, my problem is with its implementation rather than the fact of its existence.
I would agree with that. I think, yeah.
But but we have touched on something else, and I think I think we need to do an episode on the Cyberpunk launch, perhaps titled "How Not to Do Video Games."
Yes.
But just to touch on something really really lightly that you said a lot earlier, no game is ever released complete. No, and like this idea that we see it. I've seen it already talking about Warhammer 3. I hope that this thing that has been showcased gets fixed in a patch. Well, the game's not out yet. Why are we talking about patching a game that doesn't exist yet?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
just you go back to Cyberpunk had a day one patch that was as big as the game.
Yeah, that's crazy. So actually, let's talk Creative Assembly very briefly before you wrap up.
I think
So. The
there's a
Total
really
War
good
series,
question here. Yeah,
yeah, Total War series, absolutely fantastic. And to be fair to Creative Assembly, when they release the game, that's the release of the game. You
sure.
know, and you either like it, you don't like it. You know, looking at Thrones of Britannia. But for example, when Warhammer 2 comes out, right, that is the release of the game. And you know, there's some bug fixes because you know games are massive nowadays, and I'm sure that there are some bugs that slip through.
And I think that is something that people miss when they complain about how buggy games are now compared with games 10
Absolutely,
years ago. Games today are infinitely more complicated.
gigantic. I mean, we're talking like 100 GB for some of these games now. Absolutely ridiculous. But I think when Creative Assembly releases that game, they are saying this is the finished game, and obviously they don't just throw it out there and say we're never going to touch this ever again, because
No.
they fix it and they have teams that continue to work on these games. And I sort of liken that to a phase 4 clinical trial, which I think a lot of people don't really know is a thing, right? We talk about a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then at phase 3 the drug gets passed and approved and gets used. And took COVID vaccines, for example.
Yes.
But the phase 4 is essentially the ongoing soft trial almost afterwards, where it's out there in the circulation, and because there's now more users, you can just continue to review the game in this case and say, we didn't quite get the balance right on these swordsmen versus these spearmen, and so why don't we try and patch that and play around with it? And I think that's a very natural way of doing something that early access seemingly tries to do, but with a fully finished game.
I think that makes sense. I guess it's like I to be honest, vaguely knew about phase 4 trials, but I'd never heard it described in that way. I assume that's sort of where the blood clots thing for the COVID vaccine came in. That was
To an extent, yeah.
It only really became known when it was being given to so many people that more things were being picked up on than could possibly have been seen in
so many people. And for and how else are you gonna ever find things 10 years after the fact? You got to give it to people and then wait 10 years. You're not going to do a phase 3 trial like that. But apparently, if you are Interstellar Marines, that's exactly your your MO. you do a phase 3 trial of your game for 8 years and then never release it.
Two other things just before we wrap it up. The first thing is Humankind's open devs, which is pay to pre-order the game, and at specific points we might give you access to a very specific dev build of the game and ask you to test stuff.
Yeah, kind of like an open
it's an open beta. Yeah. Which I think I have no problem with.
If they're that upfront about it, then you know exactly what you're doing, right?
It's pre-order the game. You do not. I don't have a playable copy of Humankind on my laptop because the open dev closed because they got the data that they were after.
Yeah. The problem there is then if you do that and then they release the game early access, then I think you'll feel shortchanged.
Fair. No, I think you're probably right. I will do, but I don't think they will.
Well, let's hope not.
I mean, they pushed back the release. And the other thing is, just before we came on air, I tweeted asking people for their views on early access. And it turns out I got the timing of my tweet wrong because we've only had one response. But I asked, first question to the hive mind, early access, yay or nay? What's your best early access experience or your worst? And friend of the show, Sleek Otter, responds, yay. Early access can be an effective way to give backers of indie projects an understanding of what the game might be like and provide funding to continue development. There needs to be a clear understanding that you are relying on the dev's goodwill to deliver, though, which one might be the most coherent tweet I've ever seen, so kudos for that. But two, I think that's what we were saying, I think. That's actually quite a succinct way of putting the conclusion that we think we've come to.
Kind of Inception-y. He's concluded our episode before we recorded the episode. So thank you, Sleek Otter.
Yes.
Which is a great name, by the way.
And actually, so I think that's us. Thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. We are very happy, though, to announce the launch of the Expertise is Overrated Discord server. The link for this is in the description of this and every episode going forward, and we hope it proves to be a fun place where we can hang out and chat about our favourite fantasy or sci-fi theories with you. So do check it out and let us know what you think. Also, as ever, feel free to let us know what you thought about this podcast rate the podcast and leave us a comment or drop us an email at expertiseisoverrated@gmail.com or tweet us at @zeroexpertise. Or you can also check out our website, expertiseisoverrated.podbean.com.
And if you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. And if you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Now, in our next episode, we're going to be discussing just how weird family trees in the Tolkienarium are, especially when you start factoring in immortality. Join us then for more nonsense.